my cousin hadn't stood up from his desk that night, he would have died. Not figuratively, not eventually. He would have been crushed instantly by a massive chandelier that had been hanging above him for more than a century. And the most disturbing part isn't how close he came to death. It's the reason he stood up in the first place. Because no one was supposed to be there with him. And yet, something made sure he moved. This is a true story. I don't usually share stories like this. I'm not someone who goes looking for the paranormal. And I'm definitely not the type who assumes every unexplained event has a supernatural cause. About a year ago, I shared a family story involving my mother and a stalker, and even that felt uncomfortable to put out there. But last night, I heard another story from my family, and this one stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was exaggerated, but because of who told it. My cousin. My cousin is a police officer. He's calm, logical, and methodical. He doesn't scare easily, and he doesn't believe in ghosts. He's the type of person who relies on evidence, procedure, and rational explanations. He doesn't tell stories for attention, and he doesn't embellish details. Before this incident, he had never experienced anything he couldn't explain. That's why when he told me this story, I listened carefully. Because the more he talked, the more obvious it became that something about that night still bothered him. This happened early in his career. He was young, new to the department, and, like most rookies, he didn't have much say in his assignments. The less desirable posts were usually given to the newest officers. That's how he ended up assigned to an island. Not a tropical island, not a place people visited for fun. This island housed a historical site, a museum, located in a busy part of the United States. Because of its historical value and location, it required security all the clock. Someone had to be there at all times. Most nights, that meant one officer alone. Among officers, the island had a reputation. Not officially, nothing written down, but everyone talked about it. Older officers would smirk when a new guy got assigned there. They'd make comments like, "Good luck tonight," or "Hope you don't get bored." Eventually, someone would say it outright. That place is haunted. The stories varied. Strange noises, doors opening and closing, feelings of being watched, sounds that couldn't be explained. My cousin didn't believe any of it. He assumed it was just a way for veteran officers to mess with rookies, a tradition, a joke, something to pass the time. So he laughed it off. At first, the assignment didn't seem that bad. The island was accessible only by boat. At the start of each shift, an officer would dock, enter the building, and remain there until morning. During the day, tourists and staff came and went. At night, the island emptied completely. No visitors, no employees, just one officer, and a very old building. Most nights were quiet. My cousin would perform routine patrols of the building and the grounds, checking doors, scanning the perimeter, making sure everything was secure. Then he'd return to his post, watch TV, and monitor the security cameras. Sometimes another officer on patrol would stop by boat if things were slow. They'd talk, complain about the job, maybe share food. Those were the good nights. But not every night was like that. The night everything happened, the weather changed. Late in the evening, a storm moved in. Rain began falling hard, the wind picked up, and thick fog rolled across the water surrounding the island. Visibility dropped quickly. It was the kind of weather that discouraged anyone from traveling unless absolutely necessary, which meant my cousin knew he'd be alone all night. Inside the museum was a large room where he spent most of his shift. It had once been a ballroom. The ceilings were high, much higher than modern buildings, and the space felt hollow at night. Sounds behaved strangely there. Footsteps echoed longer than they should have. Small noises seemed louder. In the center of the room sat a large desk. On it was a television and several monitors showing live feeds from the security cameras positioned around the island. And hanging directly above the desk was a massive chandelier. It was ornate, made of brass and glass, with arms extending outward, each holding a bulb shaped like a candle flame. It had been hanging there for over a century, suspended by a thick chain anchored into the ceiling. During slow shifts, my cousin would sometimes stare up at it, counting the bulbs or watching it sway slightly when the wind rattled the building. It was just something to do to stay awake. That night, rain hammered against the windows as he sat at the desk, half watching TV and half listening to the storm outside. Old buildings make noise during bad weather. Creaking wood, shifting metal, distant groans caused by wind pressure. None of that bothered him until he heard something different. A door slamming. Not a creak, not a groan, a sharp, deliberate slam. It came from the far side of the building. At first, he didn't react. Other officers sometimes arrived unannounced, docked their boats, and came inside without calling ahead. It wasn't unusual for someone to walk around before heading to the main room. So he waited. Seconds passed, then a full minute. No footsteps, no voices. That struck him as odd. He turned toward the security monitors and checked the camera covering the main dock. There was no boat, only rain hitting the pier and fog drifting across the water. He checked the interior cameras, empty hallways, closed doors. Still, he wasn't alarmed. He told himself it was probably nothing. Old building, stormy night. Then he heard it again. Another door slammed. This one sounded farther away, deeper inside the building. This time, he stood up. He left the desk and stepped into the main hallway. The museum looked the same as it always did at night. Long corridors, closed doors, dim emergency lighting casting soft shadows along the walls. He walked slowly, listening, expecting to hear footsteps or voices. There was nothing. No movement, no sound. He called out, asking if anyone was inside somewhere, assuming another officer might be somewhere inside. No response. That's when the uneasy feeling started to creep in. Not fear, not panic, just confusion. He walked farther down the hallway, checking doors as he went. Everything was locked, everything was secure. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs that anyone had come in recently. Still, something felt off. So he turned around and headed toward the exit. Outside, the storm had worsened. Rain came down hard, blurring the edges of everything in sight. Fog rolled across the water, thick and heavy, swallowing the lights along the dock. He scanned the water carefully, expecting to see a boat nearby. Maybe another officer had dropped someone off and left. Maybe someone was idling in the distance, waiting to scare him as a joke. There was nothing. No engine noise, no lights, no silhouettes moving through the fog. The island was completely isolated. Standing there in the rain, my cousin felt foolish. He told himself he was overthinking it. Long shifts had a way of playing tricks on your mind. Fatigue made small things seem bigger than they were. He headed back inside. Before returning to the ballroom, he stopped and grabbed his radio from his belt. Just to be sure, he called out over the channel, asking if anyone had been on the island recently. Almost immediately, two voices responded. One officer said he was on the mainland, sitting down to eat dinner. He hadn't been near the island all night. Another officer said he was miles away, patrolling the water by boat. He hadn't docked anywhere near the museum. Neither of them sounded like they were joking. My cousin stood there, radio in hand, trying to make sense of it. If no one else had been there, then what had caused the doors to slam? He didn't have an answer. Eventually, he convinced himself he must have imagined it. Maybe the wind had forced a door shut. Maybe the sound had echoed strangely through the building. He put the radio back on his belt and walked back toward the ballroom. That's when everything changed. As soon as he stepped inside the room, he froze. The desk was gone. Or at least, it looked like it was. Where the desk had been sitting moments earlier was now a pile of shattered glass, twisted metal, and debris scattered across the floor. The chandelier was no longer hanging from the ceiling. It had fallen. The massive fixture lay in pieces directly on the desk, crushed beneath its weight. Shards of glass covered the surface. The brass frame was bent and broken, tangled like a collapsed cage. My cousin couldn't move. He stared at the wreckage, trying to understand what he was seeing. That chandelier had been hanging directly above him. If he hadn't stood up,
If he hadn't left the desk, he would have been directly underneath it. There would have been no time to react. The weight alone would have been enough to kill him instantly. He radioed for help immediately, his voice shaking as he reported the incident. Within a short time, several officers arrived by boat despite the storm. They docked quickly and rushed inside. Together, they surveyed the damage. None of them could believe what they were seeing. The chandelier had been hanging there for over a century. It had survived storms, renovations, and decades of wear without any issues. There were no reports of instability, no signs that it was unsafe. Yet somehow, on this night, it had broken free and fallen. The officers asked my cousin where he had been standing when it happened. When he told them, they all went quiet, because the